Have you ever stopped to think that perhaps what you call spiritual seeking is exactly what distances you from true enlightenment? There is a fascinating paradox at the heart of the human journey toward awakening, and most people go their entire lives without realizing it. Alan Watts spent decades exploring this fundamental contradiction, and what he discovered can completely transform the way you perceive your own spiritual path. The greatest mistake is not in doing too little, but in doing too much. It is not in being lazy, but in being excessively dedicated. And the irony of it all is so profound that at the moment you finally understand, you realize you have always been exactly where you needed to be, but you spent years ignoring this simple truth because you were too busy trying to get somewhere. Let's explore together this invisible trap that ensnares millions of sincere seekers, turning the journey to enlightenment into a maze with no exit. True enlightenment is not something you achieve in the future, but something you recognize in the present. And this distinction makes all the difference between a life of spiritual frustration and an existence of authentic fulfillment. Alan Watts used to say that the greatest obstacle to enlightenment is the very idea that you need to become enlightened. Think about that for a moment. When you decide that you need to attain enlightenment, you immediately create a separation between who you are now and who you imagine you need to become. This division is artificial, created by the mind, but it becomes absurdly real in your everyday experience. You start to judge every thought, every emotion, every action as something that brings you closer to or further away from enlightenment. And in this process of constant judgment, you distance yourself more and more from the direct experience of life that is happening right in front of you at this very moment. Enlightenment is not a future destination that you reach through accumulated effort over the years. It is an immediate perception that there was never anything to attain, no place to arrive at, no transformation necessary. You are already whole, already complete, already an inseparable part of the universe that observes, but as long as you are trying to become something different from what you are, this truth will remain hidden behind the fog of your incessant seeking. The fundamental error that Alan Watts identified is what he called trying to grasp the wind. The more you try to capture enlightenment through techniques, practices, and spiritual disciplines, the more it slips through your fingers. Not because these practices are bad or useless, but because the very attitude of seeking creates the problem you are trying to solve. It is like trying to see your own eyes without a mirror, or like biting your own teeth. The structure of the search already contains within it the seed of failure, because it presupposes that there is a separate self that needs to find something outside of itself. But true enlightenment reveals that this separation never existed. The observer and the observed, the seeker and the sought, are aspects of the same indivisible reality. When you finally stop seeking, not because you have given up or become lazy, but because you have understood the futility of the search itself, something extraordinary happens. It is not that you find what you were looking for, but rather that you realize you never lost anything to begin with. Enlightenment is not an acquisition, but a recognition. It is not something you add to your experience, but something you remove. All the layers of concepts, expectations, and efforts that obscured what has always been present. Many people spend decades meditating, studying sacred texts, participating in spiritual retreats, all in search of this elusive enlightenment. And there is genuine value in these practices, but not in the way most imagine. They do not bring you closer to enlightenment as if it were a geographical destination. Instead, they can gradually reveal the absurdity of the search itself. They can show that the more you try to control your mind, the more agitated it becomes. The more you try to force a transcendent experience, the more you remain trapped in the ordinary experience. The more you try to become spiritual, the more you reinforce the illusion of a separate self that needs to be improved. Alan Watts saw this happen repeatedly, with sincere seekers who turned spirituality into yet another ego project, another achievement to be added to their personal resume. True enlightenment has nothing to do with improving yourself or accumulating spiritual accomplishments. It has everything to do with realizing that you were never the limited character you imagined yourself to be. You are not just your memories, your thoughts, your emotions. You are the vast and silent consciousness in which all of this appears and disappears like waves in an infinite ocean. If you have made it this far, you are probably feeling something resonate within you, a sense that there is truth in these words, even if your rational mind wants to argue. If this content makes sense to you, consider subscribing to the channel so you don't miss the upcoming videos, where we will continue exploring these profound themes. Also leave a comment with the city you are watching from. I would love to know where this message is reaching. And if you believe that others could benefit from this perspective, give it a like so that the algorithm helps more sincere seekers find this material. The paradox of enlightenment deepens when we realize that all spiritual techniques, all meditations, all mantras and visualizations can easily become just another way to reinforce the ego that they are supposedly meant to dissolve. Alan Watts often observed how dedicated practitioners developed a subtle spiritual pride, a sense of superiority for being on the path while others remained in ignorance. This spiritual pride is perhaps even more dangerous than common pride because it disguises itself as humility and compassion. The person says they are seeking enlightenment to help all beings, but deep down there is a secret satisfaction in seeing themselves as someone special, someone who understands things that others do not. And the more you pursue enlightenment with this kind of hidden motivation, the more you become entangled in the very ego traps you claim to be transcending. True enlightenment does not make you feel special or superior. In fact, it completely dissolves the need to be special because it reveals that there is no one separate to be special in the first place. When you truly see this, not with the intellect but with your whole being, the search simply falls away like dead leaves from a tree in autumn. One of Alan Watts's most revolutionary insights was his understanding that the very concept of enlightenment as something to be achieved is a product of culture, not an absolute reality. In many Eastern traditions, particularly in Zen, there is a deep understanding that the goal of spiritual practice is to see through the illusion that there is a goal to be achieved. That is why you find these perplexing paradoxes in Zen teachings, such as, if you meet the Buddha on the road, kill him, or, before enlightenment, chop wood and carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood and carry water. These statements are not just mystical poetry meant to confuse students. They point to a fundamental truth that the intellect struggles to grasp. The enlightened life is not different from ordinary life, except for the absence of the illusion that it should be different. You do not become a different person when you awaken. You simply stop pretending to be someone you are not. The same activities continue, the same body continues, the same thoughts and emotions continue to arise and disappear. But there is a fundamental lightness because you are no longer trying to be something beyond what you already are. Enlightenment is not an extraordinary experience that replaces ordinary experience. It is the perception that ordinary experience, seen clearly without the filters of the ego and its demands, is already extraordinary. Alan Watts often used the metaphor of dreaming to explain our existential dilemma. When you are dreaming, everything in the dream seems absolutely real. You might be chased by a monster and feel genuine fear without realizing that both you and the monster are creations of the same dreaming mind. Only when you wake up from the dream do you realize that you were safe all along, that the danger was imaginary. Enlightenment is similar to waking up from a dream, except that you do not wake up to a different reality. You wake up within this reality and see that the separate self you thought you were, that character with your name, your story, your concerns and ambitions, is as illusory as the character in the dream. The difference is that when you wake up from a nighttime dream, you still believe in the reality of the self that woke up. But when you awaken to true enlightenment, you see that even this everyday self is a useful convention, not an independent and separate entity. You do not disappear, but the feeling of being an isolated ego defended against the universe disappears. And with this dissolution comes an indescribable freedom, because you no longer need to protect and promote a self that never existed in the way you imagined. The greatest mistake that distances you from true enlightenment is, therefore, the attempt to attain it. This sounds like a logical impossibility, and in a way it is. How do you stop seeking without making the cessation of seeking yet another goal? How do you relax into enlightenment without turning relaxation into another effort? This is the final trap that Alan Watts identified, and the only way out is through direct understanding, not through more techniques or strategies. At some point, if you are truly sincere in your inquiry, you will see the complete absurdity of the situation. You will see that you are trying to jump over your own shadow, that you are looking for your glasses while wearing them. And in that perception of absurdity, something releases. It's not that you achieve enlightenment at that moment, but rather that you stop fighting against life as it is. You stop insisting that the present should be different. You stop projecting your happiness onto an imaginary future where you will finally be enlightened. And in the space created by this cessation of effort, you can finally notice what has always been here. The clear and open awareness in which all experience arises, including the experience of being a seeker on a spiritual journey. What Alan Watts offered was not another method to achieve enlightenment, but a way to see through all methods. He was not trying to give you something new, but rather to help you abandon what is false. And what is false is not your experience, but your interpretations of it. It is not your thoughts and emotions, but your identification with them as being who you are. It is not the world that appears before you, but your demands about how it should be. When these layers of falsity are seen for what they are and gradually fall away, what remains is not a meaningless void, but a vibrant fullness that was always present, only obscured by your incessant search for something more, something better, something different. The supreme irony of the spiritual journey is that you eventually discover that there was never a journey. The starting point and the destination have always been the same place, and all the years of practice and seeking were simply the process of realizing this. Alan Watts compared this to a person who spends decades searching for water while being submerged in the ocean. The water is everywhere, but the person is so focused on searching that they cannot notice the obvious. Similarly, enlightenment is not something distant that you need to achieve through great effort. It is the basic nature of your own consciousness, so close that you consistently ignore it because you are looking for something more spectacular. You expect lights, ecstasies, transcendent mystical experiences, when true enlightenment is simply seeing what has always been evident but rarely noticed, that you are inseparable from the totality of existence, that your consciousness is not contained within a separate body, but is the open space in which all bodies and all worlds appear. This perception does not come through more effort or more techniques. It comes through a deep relaxation into what is already the case, an abandonment of the struggle to become something different from what you fundamentally are. One of Alan Watts's greatest contributions was his ability to translate profound Eastern concepts into Western language and context without diluting their essence. He recognized that many Westerners approach spirituality with the same mindset they applied to business or sports, setting goals, creating plans, measuring progress, competing with others, achieving results. But enlightenment does not work that way. You cannot treat it as just another item on your personal achievement list. The more you try to force it, the less it happens. The more you measure your spiritual progress, the more you reinforce the sense of separation. That is exactly what needs to be seen through. Alan Watts was not saying that you should be passive or stop practicing altogether. What he was pointing to was a radical shift in perspective. Instead of using spiritual practices as tools to achieve a future state of enlightenment, you could use them as opportunities to notice what is already present here and now. Meditation, from this perspective, is not a way to produce a special mental state, but an opportunity to observe the mind as it is, without judgment and without the need to change it. And in that clear, agenda-free observation, something reveals itself that no amount of effort could produce. The greatest mistake that distances you from true enlightenment also has an important temporal dimension. When you are seeking enlightenment, you are always living in the future, always imagining a moment when you will finally be different, better, more awake. But enlightenment can only happen now because now is the only moment that truly exists. The past is memory appearing now. The future is imagination happening now. All you really have is this present moment, and yet you spend most of your life completely ignoring it because you are mentally inhabiting some imagined time. Alan Watts saw this as one of the great tragedies of human life, people wasting their precious years in preparation for a life they plan to live later, without realizing that the only life that exists is happening right now. True enlightenment is not an altered state that you achieve in the future. It is simply being fully present in life as it unfolds moment by moment, without resistance, without demands, without the compulsive need to be anywhere other than where you are. This does not mean that you stop making plans or working towards goals. It means that you do these things without losing touch with the only reality that exists, the eternal now. When you finally see through the greatest mistake, when you recognize that the very search was the obstacle, something profoundly simple and profoundly liberating is revealed. You realize that you do not need to wait for anything, do not need to become anything, do not need to achieve anything. You are already complete, already whole, already home. This realization does not come from accumulating more knowledge or having more spiritual experiences, and it comes from an emptying, a releasing of all ideas about how you and life should be. Alan Watts called this the wisdom of insecurity, the understanding that you never had and never will have the kind of control and certainty that the ego craves. And the moment you truly accept this, not intellectually but viscerally, a deep peace arises, not because your circumstances have changed, but because you have stopped fighting against the fundamental nature of reality. Life continues with its joys and sorrows, its pleasures and pains, but you are no longer at war with it. You see that all of this is part of a cosmic dance in which you have never been a separate spectator, but have always been an integral participant. True enlightenment does not solve all your problems or transform you into a flawless superhuman. What it does is show that the main problem you thought you had, the problem of being an inadequate and separate self in a hostile universe, was never real. And when this fundamental problem is seen as illusory, all other problems take on a completely different perspective. They do not necessarily disappear, but you deal with them from a place of wholeness rather than lack, from presence rather than absence. Alan Watts lived this understanding and conveyed it with a clarity and humor that continue to resonate decades after his death. His legacy is not a belief system or a set of practices, but an invitation to look directly at your own experience and see what has always been evident, that you are not an isolated fragment trying to find your way back home, but rather the very consciousness in which the concept of being lost and being home arises. And to see this, to truly see this, is the end of the search and the beginning of living. If this video has helped you see something in a new way, if these reflections on the greatest mistake that distances you from true enlightenment have touched something within you, please consider subscribing to the channel and turning on notifications to continue this journey of discovery with us. Leave a comment saying which city you are watching us from and which insight resonated most with you. And don't forget to leave your like. It greatly helps to spread this message to others who are also questioning, seeking, and perhaps ready to stop searching and simply wake up to what has always been here.